With this Blues Guitar Lessons for Beginners video, we'll take another step closer to being able to solo and improvise by showing you how to phrase blues riffs while soloing with rhythm, along with guitar tabs and practice rhythm backing tracks. We'll cover it all with the step-by-step approach. Learning how to solo and improvise, it's very similar to learning how to speak another language. For example, when you first learn to copy some blues riffs, it's the same approach as learning and copying your first sentences. And right about that time you copy sentences, you also start to focus on punctuation. And with punctuation in music, phrasing is how you apply punctuation to a solo or an improvisation. And if we leave this language comparison for a second, phrasing is basically the ability to land on the right note at the right time. And the first step with learning how to phrase is learning how to use root notes. When using the blues scale to solo and improvise, your root notes can be considered the capital letters and periods for your phrasing. And understanding this concept of root notes is pretty straightforward. If you're playing blues in A, for example, every A note would be considered the root note of that key. So let's apply this concept of phrasing with root notes with what we've covered in previous lessons. For most guitarists, the first time they play the blues scale, they play the pentatonic minor box pattern. And usually it's in the key of A, which is along the 5th fret position. Now, it's one thing to play a box pattern, but if you apply some phrasing technique by focusing on the root notes, that helps you capture the intended bluesy mood of the scale. So you have to stop on certain notes. Again, it's one thing to play the pattern, but you have to stop on certain notes if you want to capture the mood right. So, first step is with that box pattern, we determine where the 3 A root notes are. And if you look at the box pattern diagram, that'll sync up with what I'm about to play. I'm going to play the low A root note on the 6th string. Then we jump up to the middle A root note, and then the high A root note. And it's pretty good ear training to maybe do that a couple times and also get acclimated to the root note positions within the pentatonic minor box pattern. Now, as far as capturing the intended bluesy mood of the scale when you play the box pattern, now if we looked at previous lessons, we've already done this, but if I just didn't mention they were root notes. But if you haven't, you might find this interesting. When you start with the box pattern, you start with the root note and then play it in ascending order, but then you end on the top string 5th fret, the high A root note. So when you play the box pattern the right way, dun, 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 you actually capture that intended bluesy mood of the scale. If you end on a different note, it's not going to sound as bluesy. And then when you practice the pattern in descending order, what you do is you pause on that note that we just let ring, and then you play it again. In other words, we're phrasing. This is phrase 1. Phrase 2, again, we start with the root note, so we double or play that note again. Not only that, you put a little emphasis, a little extra sustain on the root note, and that's a great foundation. That's literally step 1 with phrasing, is knowing how to stop on the root notes. And what we'll do next is we'll apply root notes to some riffs or classic blues riffs that we've also covered. One of the classic riffs we covered in a previous lesson was the bend and release riff. And this riff is also in A blues, along that 5th fret position. Same box pattern too, the pentatonic minor. And here's how the bend and release riff sounds. Real basic riff, but we've heard this classic riff or some variation of it in lots of blues songs and classic rock solos. And the riff has a root note focus. In other words, we're applying some phrasing by beginning and ending on the middle A root note. Another riff we did was a riff I called the blues riff, also in A, in the same box pattern. Here's how the blues riff in A sounds. Now, the blues riff doesn't start on an A root note, but it ends on one, and that note is also emphasized as well. And when you emphasize the root note, or kind of land on it, let it ring or sustain, you're establishing the mood of the scale. And so that's another key when it comes to connecting riffs. You kind of want to let the root notes ring or sustain a little bit longer. Again, that helps establish the mood or tone. And let's do an example of that. Let's connect everything we've covered so far, starting with the box pattern. And then I'll mix in the bending riffs. And then we'll descend the scale. But if you notice, we're emphasizing the root notes a little bit. And again, when you know they're the root notes and you do it intentionally, it kind of comes out. You sound a little bit more confident or competent with your playing, and you can actually anticipate the mood when you know how that root note sounds as well. So in other words, you sound a little bit more control with your soloing when you intentionally focus on the root notes. Next, we're going to apply phrasing these blues riffs along with some backing rhythm tracks. And if you haven't done much of this before, playing along with the backing rhythm, that can really throw off your concentration, especially if you're relatively new to playing these riffs. It's tough enough to remember to play them correct, but when you hear that backing rhythm, it can throw off your concentration. So before doing it, it's a good idea to set out a prearranged running order of riffs before we play along with that backing track. And it's going to be a review of everything we've covered. We're going to start with the blues riff. And we'll connect that to the bend and release riff. And note, we're letting the root note ring at the end of each riff, ring or sustain. And then we'll go up and down the box pattern, letting the root note ring or sustain. Same note again. And then we'll follow that by connecting those two riffs again. So we're going to repeat those two connected riffs. Right about that time, we'll be at the end of the rhythm track. And depending on what pace you're playing, we want to end on a root note to produce a harmonized ending. So not only do you want to emphasize a root note, you want to end on one as well. And so it all depends on how fast you're playing. This middle root note, when we come time for you're going to hear that final chord strum. If you land that note right with that final chord, that produces a harmonized ending. Also, if you happen to maybe land on that note a little soon, you can jump to the top root note as well. That tends to sing out a little bit. You could play that with the harmonized ending as well. So either root note, the middle or the top string. The low one doesn't really stand out so much, but the middle or the top string will sound really good for a harmonized ending. So here we go with the next clip. And also one other thing, there will be a guide solo. So that might help you not play too fast or help you keep up a little bit. But with the next track, there will be a guide solo of myself playing the riffs along with the rhythm. So if you can just sync up with the guide track, don't play ahead, try not to fall behind. That'll be a great way to help you develop a sense of phrasing in the key of A. Now the same concept of movable box patterns and movable riffs also applies to the root note positions. In other words, you can play all of these riffs and focus on these root notes in different keys. And that box pattern we did in A initially, those three root notes, that pattern, those are the fundamental root note positions within that standard blues box pattern. So if we were to move up 2 frets, A sharp, B, there's your 3 B root notes, and all the riffs And the same three root notes apply the root note positions in different keys. So what we'll do in the next clip, we'll do another blues jam, and this one will be in B blues. So you can get acclimated to, again, playing the same riffs, but it's also good to hear how they sound in different keys as well. And one of the first creative things you can do with these riffs is you can start rearranging the running order in which they're played. And so if we were to change things up, let's go to, this time we're going to play in D flat blues. That's going to be up at the 9th fret position. The new running order we'll apply will be this. We'll start with the descending riff, or descending down the box pattern. We'll follow that with the bend and release riff. Then we'll go back to going up the scale. Then the blues riff. And then we'll end with that initial connected riff we did. And depending on where you're at, you could either end on that note for a harmonized ending, that middle root note, or jump to the top string for a harmonized ending. And so, again, next clip, D flat along the 9th fret, and let's work on rearranging these riffs. Now, next challenge will be to play along with the backing rhythm track without a guide solo. And we also want to encourage you to be a little bit more creative with rearranging the running order riffs as well. We have 4 options, and in fact we're going to go over everything we just did in A flat. The 4 options are going up the box pattern, option 1 going down the box pattern, and then 2 riffs, option 3, option 4. Now, the potential combinations you have with those 4 options, the different running orders, that would be, well, we have 4 total options. 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. I forget the name of that mathematical equation, but we do come up with 24 potential combinations you can do with these 4 riffs. So with the next clip, which will be in A flat blues, again along the 4th fret, I'm going to extend it for 2 verses, and that'll give you time to try out different running orders, experiment a little bit without feeling too rushed by only having a 12-bar progression. That's what we did previously. So in the next clip, mix and match the riffs any order you want. You've got 2 verses, and it'll be in A flat blues. Once you have this lesson down, the next step is to move up to the next lesson or level with blues soloing basics. And with that next lesson, We'll learn some additional blues riffs we'll add to your blues riffs vocabulary by learning some riffs with double stops, passing tones, and some new bending riffs as well.